Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today is Tuesday, August 11th. We are now 84 days away from the elections in November. Please don't mind this map. I'm going to reset this for you here. We're now 84 days away, and obviously today we received the biggest news of the campaign season so far, and that is Joe Biden has selected at last, after a very long wait, has selected Kamala Harris, the junior senator from California, the first-term senator from California, to be his running mate against Donald Trump and Mike Pence come November. So in this video, we're going to go around the horn as we always do with just a general prediction video. Please stay tuned to the channel because in an upcoming video, I'm going to break down how the selection of Kamala Harris is going to impact this race. So let's just go around the horn again. You know the drill, west to east. We're going to begin in the state of Hawaii. That's a safe Democratic state. Nothing to talk about there. Now in the state of Alaska. As we've talked about also before, Al Gross, Dr. Al Gross, the independent Senate candidate who has promised to caucus with the Democratic Party. The Lincoln Project, which as we know is a very influential body, is working on this race, obviously on behalf of the Democrats, but so far there's been very little indication that the Democrats are making much ground here against Dan Sullivan. In fact, they're outperforming Al Gross on both the presidential level and the House level, as Don Young, the 87-year-old representative, could potentially lose, actually, this time around, and Joe Biden is only a few points behind Donald Trump. But as of now, because of what we're seeing on the Senate level, and this is still a Republican state, I'm going to label this likely Republican. These have been consistent classifications on this channel for several weeks now. Now, in the state of Washington, as we know, the Republicans have tried to sort of paint the Seattle area as this sort of, capital of the anarchist movement, if there is such a thing. So far, we haven't seen much ground being made up really in that way. The Republican Party is not making much headway in the state of Washington, and Jay Inslee, who of course ran for president, is up for re-election in the gubernatorial race, and he is solidly defeating his Republican opponents. So for now, it's a safe Democratic state. Same thing in Oregon. Both Democratic senators from the state of Oregon are up over the course of the next 2 years. This time around, who was it? Jeff Merkley is up for re-election and is expected to win. Ron Wyden, the other senator from the state of Oregon, is up in 2 years as well. In the state of California, as if there was any doubt that Joe Biden was going to win this state, Kamala Harris just solidifies that even further. I think it's possible that Joe Biden could end up winning the state of California by 35 points. So if there was a way I could label this even more safe than solid blue, I would. In the state of Idaho, there's nothing to discuss there. Paulette Jordan is a Democratic Senate candidate. The mere fact, that the Democrats even have a Senate candidate in Idaho shows that they've made some progress there, because this kind of used to be like what Arkansas has become, or to a lesser extent West Virginia, in that it's just a state that is so to one side that sometimes candidates aren't even fielded. The House members are often uncontested. Whereas now there is a Democratic mayor of the city of Boise, and Paulette Jordan has generated a little bit of buzz, is not going to win her race, not even close, but has at least made somewhat of a name for herself as a African-American Senate candidate from the state of Idaho. Now in Nevada, obviously the Democratic Party finally managed the clean sweep. They hit the trifecta back in 2018 after winning in this state in 2016, despite the fact that Donald Trump was actually ahead on election day in the polls here by 1 percentage point. As I've broken down in this channel before, Republicans are always overstated in the state of Nevada, and that proved itself once again. Hillary Clinton was able to win by a few percentage points. They already had the other Senate seat, that belonging to Catherine Cortez Masto, going into the midterms, and Jackie Rosen was able to unseat the incumbent Republican Senator Dean Heller, to sort of start the recovery process for the Democrats in the Senate. And that was one of two very important flips for the Democrats in the Senate, the other being in the state of Arizona, that gave them sort of a puncher's chance to actually pick up the Senate this time around. Because remember, the morning after election night, the Republicans were sitting at 55 to 45, and with a couple of uncalled races, obviously. But they were sitting at 55 to 45 is what it looked like for a moment, and it was really 56 to 44 because the Democrats were sitting on a rental seat down here in Alabama. But Jackie Rosen was able to get this seat for the Democrats. Steve Sisolak was also able to win the gubernatorial race here, one of 7 states that had their governorship flip from red to blue. So for now, I'm going to label that safe Democrat. The margin at the end of the day might actually be likely, but it's also very, very, very likely that Joe Biden is not only going to win the state, but win it with a majority as opposed to a plurality, which we see oftentimes in Nevada, as there are a lot of third-party independent voters in the state. In Utah, a safe Republican state, it could end up being a likely margin. Remember, the Democrats, for the first time in a long time, picked up a House seat here. Ben McAdams was able to defeat Mia Love. Remember the morning after the midterms, of course, Donald Trump famously said, "Mia Love gave me no love." And Ben McAdams was able to win that seat just barely by about 0.2 of a point. He is actually expected to win a re-election, which would be a good retention for the Democrats in the House, but there's still obviously a little under 3 months to go. But on the presidential level, safe for the Republicans. Pay attention here, though, to the final margin, because it's possible that the Mitt Romney factor could actually sway a few voters away from Donald Trump. So it's possible that he wins this state with a plurality. Just because the voters who may be swayed by Mitt Romney, and there are some, the data shows that they're definitely not going to vote for Biden, though. Obviously, there's no Evan McMullin this time around, but there is a Joe Jorgensen, there is a Howie Hawkins, but we'll see. So for now, though, safe Republican state. In the state of Arizona, this is obviously pretty much, if you're going from west to east here, as we always do, this is the first pickup opportunity for the Democrats. As of 2018, the Democrats now have more members in the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives, than the Republicans do for the first time in a long time. Now, the gubernatorial race won by Doug Ducey was not that close, which was surprising considering Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat, was able to defeat Martha McSally, who now is being challenged in the special election after she was appointed to the seat that was vacated by Jon Kyl, in turn by John McCain. Now she's being challenged by Mark Kelly, of course, the veteran, the former astronaut husband of Gabrielle Giffords. Mark Kelly is beating her to a pulp in the polling so far. In recent weeks, I would say, well, maybe like the last 2 weeks, the polls have tightened up just a little bit here on both the presidential and the Senate level. They've always been tighter on the presidential level than they were on the Senate level in this state over the last few weeks. However, it's continuing to tighten up. Of course, there was that Gravis marketing poll from several weeks back now, maybe it was a month ago now, that had Martha McSally leading Mark Kelly by about 4 percentage points. But as I've broken down before, Gravis marketing is probably the worst pollster to talk about other than OAN. So for right now, I'm going to label this lean Democrat, although it's possible if we continue to see that this slow tilt, this could come down to a tilt margin here. And remember, Donald Trump only won this state by a plurality, as he did in a number of states. And back in 2016, this wasn't even a swing state. So I expect Joe Biden to flip the state of Arizona and pick up those 11 votes for the first time for Democrats since Bill Clinton. In the state of Montana, obviously a lot of interesting races here. This is one of the most fascinating states to break down politically. For what is obviously a ruby red state, there has not been a Republican governor of the state of Montana since 2000. It looks like that is going to change. Steve Bullock, who's an extremely popular incumbent governor who won re-election by a considerable margin the same night that Donald Trump won in the state of Montana by over 20 points, is running for the Senate, and he is challenging Steve Daines, who is a moderately unpopular senator. He's kind of similar to Dan Sullivan. Voters appear to just be a little indifferent to Steve Daines, not a very well-known guy nationally. Was at the forefront of a number of pretty conservative firebrand bills when he was a member of the House, when he was the House member from the state of Montana, the lone House member. But now he is the senator being challenged by Steve Daines. Of course, as we know, the Democrats have the other Senate seat here, that belonging to Jon Tester. And wouldn't it be something if the Democratic Party came away with both Senate seats in the state of Montana without having to bring Max Baucus back from the dead? Of course, Max Baucus, who represented the state of Montana in the Senate for decades. Of course, also on the House level, Kathleen Williams is being challenged by, or she is rather challenging for the seat, also by Matt Rosendale, the Republican, who has seemingly run for office now like half a dozen times. But as I mentioned on the gubernatorial level, right now the race is between Greg Gianforte, who is currently the House member representing the state, and Mike Cooney, the lieutenant governor, the Democrat. Obviously, he is part of the Steve Bullock administration. Now, you would think that voters who voted for Steve Bullock would also vote for Mike Cooney, considering he is part of the same administration. He's basically the closest thing you can find to Steve Bullock without cloning him. So that would obviously suggest that Steve Bullock himself, just alone, is a very popular guy amongst Montana voters. And obviously he is. However, it does appear, though, that it's maybe less exclusive to that, and also that it could just be Steve Bullock's popularity is beginning to wane, because he's currently losing to Steve Daines. After Steve Bullock won the Democratic primary, as he was widely expected to do. Of course, remember, as we've talked about before, he threw his hat in the ring literally minutes before the filing deadline. Since then, though, after leading for the first couple months of the race, he is now losing to Steve Daines. The most recent poll had Steve Daines ahead of Steve Bullock by 6 percentage points. So that, combined with Mike Cooney losing to Greg Gianforte, who has his own legal checkered past after he body slammed a reporter and was caught on tape doing it, clearly the Republicans are licking their chops here, and it looks like they're going to be able to actually get themselves back on even footing in this state, and the Democrats are going to be left with Jon Tester. So on the presidential level, it's obviously a safe state, but watch for it on the Senate level. In Wyoming, nothing to discuss there. Now, in the state of Colorado, some models still label this a swing state. Personally, I do not. I think this is a safe state. After John Hickenlooper relinquished his seat to run for president, the Democrats were able to retain the governorship with Jared Polis, the gay governor of the state of Colorado. And of course, Cory Gardner is sort of the last vestige of Republican politics in the state of Colorado. And he is, of course, now being challenged by John Hickenlooper, who's very popular within his state, very popular even amongst moderate Republicans. Some polls have it a little closer than Democrats would like, and of course Hickenlooper recently had his ethics violation, in which he was fined for 2 separate violations by an ethics panel. But as of now, Hickenlooper is thoroughly defeating Cory Gardner, and Jared Polis, the governor's his approval ratings have skyrocketed per his handling of the pandemic, and so far Joe Biden is showing no signs of having any trouble in Colorado. In the state of New Mexico, Ben Ray Lujan is running for this seat. It was an open seat after the incumbent is, I believe it's Tom Udall, announced his retirement. Ben Ray Lujan, the representative, is easily defeating his Republican opponent. New Mexico, of course, was one of those 7 states in which the governorship flipped. The others were Nevada, Kansas, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Maine. In New Mexico on the presidential level, again, I think 538 still labels this a swing state. It's really not a swing state. Now in the state of North Dakota, of course, the Democratic Party, for, again, a ruby red state, the Democratic Party had a lot of things happening in this state for a long time. Kent Conrad was a long-time Democratic senator from this state. And then, more recently, Heidi Heitkamp was the senator from here, but she was defeated by Kevin Cramer. That was one of 4 flips that the Republicans made in the 2018 midterms. The others on the Senate level, the others being Missouri, Indiana, and Florida. The Democrats, as I mentioned earlier, flipped in Arizona and Nevada. Remember, also in 2008, this was a state that wasn't called immediately at poll closing hour. So that gives you kind of a sense of how far to the right this state has shifted in recent years. And Heidi Heitkamp, while she put up a good fight and raised a bunch of money, all that, she's still lost by double digits. So this is a safe Republican state. Now, South Dakota, as I've mentioned a number of times in the channel, is the Democratic Party in the state of South Dakota is famous. They do phenomenal work. They are known to be one of the best state parties of either political party in the United States. Kristi Noem, the Republican governor of the state, had a tough time in that election. I can't remember if it was in 2016 or 18. I think it was in 18. The Democrat, whose name is escaping me right now, got 47% of the vote there, okay? And remember, recently, Tim Johnson represented the Senate from there, so South Dakota was a state, kind of like North Dakota, that the Democrats for a little while had a real shot to compete in. But this time around, again, on the presidential level, nothing to discuss. Mike Rounds, the senator, is going to be just fine in his reelection bid. Nebraska, Ben Sasse and Donald Trump are going to be just fine. Now, in the state of Kansas, as we know, Chris Kobach lost, shockingly, his Senate or his governorship bid in 2018 to Laura Kelly, the Democrat. So that was sort of a, in what was a somewhat of a disappointing night for the Democrats in 2018, this was kind of a good surprise win for them. Kobach gave it another shot, this time running for the Senate in the Republican primary. He lost and lost thoroughly to Roger Marshall, the representative who since then looks like he is going to soundly defeat Barbara Bollier, the former Republican, who has switched parties to the Democrats and for a little while was thought to be another balance of power shift, candidate there. But since Roger Marshall has won, he is so far thoroughly ahead of Barbara Bollier. And on the presidential level, Donald Trump's not going to have any problems. In Oklahoma, this is about as safe as it gets right now. Donald Trump won every single county in this state. In 2016, there were only 2 states in the entire country that this happened. In 2016, the other was West Virginia. So this is obviously a ruby red state now in the state of Texas. This idea that Texas is becoming a blue state is completely overblown. In 2018, Beto O'Rourke, obviously the upstart candidate, the representative from out here in El Paso, ran a great race, famously visited all 254 counties of the state of Texas, and came pretty close to defeating Ted Cruz. I believe the final margin was 51 point. It wasn't exactly lined up because a third-party candidate got some votes, but I think it was something like 51.3 to 48.3, something along those lines. So Ted Cruz obviously had the toughest re-election bid of his Senate career, but was able at the end of the day, despite being a deeply unpopular senator and running against a candidate that was very, very well liked amongst independents, amongst Latinos, amongst virtually every demographic that matters in a Senate race, and he still won at the end of the day. So that's number one. Number two, the other Senate race is up this time around. MJ Hager, who ran for a House seat up here in Northeast Texas, kind of west of Dallas, she lost in her House bid. She is now the Democratic nominee for this seat after she defeated Royce West in the Democratic primary for the seat, and they're running against John Cornyn, another unpopular senator, but not nearly as unpopular as John Cornyn, and he is thoroughly ahead of MJ Hager there. Of course, Greg Abbott, he easily won his re-election bid over Lupe Valdez in 2016 as well, or 2018 rather. However, on the presidential level, Joe Biden is making a lot of noise in the Lone Star State. And right now, the Democratic Party in the state of Texas is the largest in the state of any party, or of the Democratic Party out of any state. It's the largest. I misspoke there. And that state party has been urging the Biden campaign and some of the big donors from California, New York, and elsewhere to invest in this state. However, so far we've seen the fundraising totals have gone up in the state, but not by quite as much as the party would have liked. I think that a number of Democratic officials continue to insist on having their eyes on the ball in the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Florida, among others, North Carolina, Arizona. But Texas, Joe Biden definitely has a shot to win this state. Right now I'm going to label it tilt Republican because at the end of the day, these states have identities. And even though Joe Biden, as we know, is very popular amongst the African-American community, Latinos are going to turn out more in this election than they did in 2016. They are fired up. They are pissed off. It's not a political statement. It's just true. The data backs that up. The Democrats, obviously, they also made some state legislature gains in 2018. So yes, the state is shifting a little bit, but this idea that it's kind of suddenly a blue state or really even a purple state is incorrect. Right now, it is a competitive state that still tilts Republican. In the state of Minnesota, now this was a state that Hillary Clinton did not perform very well in 2016. She only won the state by 1.5 points. And so for the first 2 years of Trump's term, this was floated as a real flip opportunity for him. And his campaign began to focus on this state. And this would be a big realignment state for him because you knew that the Democrats were obviously going to come for Wisconsin, come for Michigan, they were going to come for Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Florida, all those states that we mentioned earlier. And so, it really came down to basically just Minnesota and New Hampshire as really Donald Trump's only flip opportunities. Maybe an outside shot in Nevada. But since then, the Democratic Party has had a field day. There were 3 statewide races. Okay, that's rare. in this state alone in 2018, and the Democrats won all of them and won all of them easily. Tina Smith, who replaced resigned Senator Al Franken, won her election. Amy Klobuchar easily won her re-election as expected, and Tim Walz, the governor, won his election. All three of them won their elections, and none of them were close. Since then, also here in the Minneapolis area, right around there where my mouse is, that whole situation, as tragic as it was, is going to help the Democratic Party. That's also just a fact, okay? Minority turnout historically helps the Democratic Party. And so that combined with the 3 statewide races that the Democrats won back in 2018 with consistent polling leads me to make this a safe Democratic state for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. All right, now in the state of Iowa, this is such a bizarre state. It's so difficult to really get a read on where this state is because it's so inconsistent. Donald Trump easily won the state of Iowa in 2016 after Barack Obama won it both times. Okay, a lot of people have lost sight of that Barack Obama was able to take this plain state twice in 2008 and 2012. Tom Harkin, of course, the Democratic senator for many years from this state. Now, since then, Donald Trump obviously won it easily in 2016. Steve King, though, for all his high-profile identity politics up here in the northwest portion of the state, he was primaried. So what accounts for that? Well, on the House level, the other 3 statewide districts are now controlled by Democrats. So the Democratic Party controls 3 of the 4 House districts, and the other was Steve King, who is now gone. In the 2018 midterms, there was a governorship race here between Kim Reynolds, the Republican, and Fred Hubbell, the Democrat. Kim Reynolds was able to win that race, but Fred Hubbell came much closer to winning that state than Hillary Clinton did. The polls, as of now, continuously show Donald Trump leading within the margin of error. So I don't expect Joe Biden to pull this one out because, as we've seen, most of the fundraising from his party and from his campaign on the presidential level has been invested in Arizona, it's been invested in Florida, and it's been invested in Pennsylvania. They were originally focusing very, very hard on Wisconsin. Of course, they were going to hold the convention there until the pandemic upended that. They were also investing a little bit in Nevada, Minnesota, and then some in Ohio as well. But Iowa doesn't appear to be a state that Joe Biden is too fixated on, and I don't think he should be. This is not that important to his path to win. Again, the more sort of the most straightforward paths for Joe Biden is either a clean sweep of the Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Florida and any of these swing states. Florida with Arizona or North Carolina or Ohio or Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin. Pretty simple. Now, in the Senate level, Teresa Greenfield so far is defeating Joni Ernst, who was originally kind of a rising star within the party after her "Let's Make Them Squeal" line in her campaign ads when she was running for Senate. So far, Teresa Greenfield looks like she might defeat Joni Ernst. And let's not forget that in 2022, Chuck Grassley, who's going to be 88 years old, I believe, is up, and he may well leave that seat open. But on the presidential level, I'm going to label this lean Republican. Possibly could tighten up to a tilt because, as we know, there are a lot of independent voters in the state of Iowa, but there are very few minority voters in the state of Iowa, and that helps the Republicans. In the state of Missouri, obviously, this is a state that the Democrats have sort of lost some ground in. Remember, back in 2008, Barack Obama came pretty close to winning here. It's been well documented that what's kind of interesting about this state is that there are basically 2 big cities, those being Kansas City and St. Louis. For whatever reason, both of them have like half of their city literally in other states. Like half of Kansas City is basically in Kansas and half of St. Louis is in Illinois. And so some studies have been done in this state breaking down how if all of St. Louis and all of Kansas City were in Missouri, Illinois would be a little less blue and Kansas would be even less blue, but Missouri would actually be a bona fide blue state. Mike Parson, the Republican governor, is winning so far in his reelection bid. Claire McCaskill lost her reelection bid to Josh Hawley, a very self-proclaimed Trump supporter, big supporter of the border wall, of the tax cuts, all that. The Democrats, I don't think, are really too focused on the state of Missouri, and as a result, I'm going to label it likely for Republican, but could end up being safe. Arkansas, nothing to discuss there. Louisiana, nothing to discuss there. Okay, now in Mississippi, I would expect this to tighten up from where it was in 2016. Mike Espy in that Senate special election did a good job against Cindy Hyde-Smith, who of course had her racist comments revealed, or at least what many perceived to be racist. Again, that's not, I'm not indicating any personal belief there. That's just how it was received. And um, Mike Espy, as a result, came pretty close. Okay, he did a good job. I think the final tally was something around 54-46. Espy's trying again. It's a rematch. He's going for it again against Cindy Hyde-Smith, who's now vying for her first full 6-year term. So far, there's no reason to believe Cindy Hyde-Smith is not going to win that race. Look, Mississippi is the highest minority population out of any state in the United States. And as we have discussed throughout this video and in many other videos, that's going to help the Democratic Party. And so I think that this will be a lot closer than people expect it to be, but that does not mean Donald Trump is not going to win this state. So I'm going to label it lean, but just keep an eye on it for future elections because the minority turnout is going to be pretty high for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Alabama, kind of the same story as Mississippi. Doug Jones is going to lose his race to Tommy Tuberville, a guy, obviously the former Auburn football coach, the former Cincinnati football coach as well. Tommy Tuberville is way ahead by double digits of Doug Jones, who won in that shocking election over Roy Moore. He barely won that race, Doug Jones. That pretty much tells you all you need to know about that state, just in where they align politically. So Alabama on the presidential level as well. Joe Biden will probably hit the 40% mark, but it's a safe Republican state. Okay, in the state of Florida, a lot to break down here. So one big domino fell today, and that was that Val Demings, a representative from right around here in Orlando, was not picked to be Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate. Val Demings, the representative from Orlando, she's a former police chief. Okay, so there were many who advocated that she be the pick because she could sort of speak to a lot of the police brutality issues that are still very much in the news today. However, a large contingent of the Democratic Party was also very insistent that she is not the pick, A, because she's not that well known nationally, and B, because now that she has been propped up nationally just a little bit because of her name being in the news, she could now potentially be the challenger against Marco Rubio in 2022. So keep an eye on that. Now, the Republican Party has done a pretty darn good job keeping Florida in their column. Even though this state, the margins are razor thin, it's basically on a knife's edge in this state. The Republican Party just keeps on racking up W's here. Okay, they've had 4 straight Republican governors. Now, technically, it's been 3 out of 4 because Charlie Crist, the former governor of the state, the former Republican, is now a Democrat, and he's a representative from over here in the Tampa area. But between Charlie Crist, I'm not going to get this order right, but Charlie Crist, Jeb Bush, now Ron DeSantis, and Rick Scott just before DeSantis. I think it's in order: Jeb Bush, Charlie Crist, Rick Scott, and Ron DeSantis. Put in the comments if I'm wrong, please. The Republicans just keep on hanging on to the gubernatorial seat here. Also on the Senate level, Bill Nelson, who has been in Florida politics for many, many years, okay, since the 80s, he lost. Okay, he lost to Rick Scott in a very close race, 50.1 to 49.9. And Ron DeSantis, with a plurality, was able to defeat Andrew Gillum 49.6 to 49.2. Those were 2 pretty disappointing results for the Democrats. They were able to flip a couple House districts down here in the South, in South Florida area, kind of in the Miami area. Donna Shalala and Debbie Mucarsel Powell were able to win their elections, defeating Carlos Curbelo, and I'm forgetting who the other Republican representative was that lost. As of now, Carlos Jimenez, who's the mayor of Miami-Dade County, is running against Debbie Mucarsel Powell and is so far winning in that race. So keep an eye on that. But Joe Biden is winning in the polls and considerably here. All that evidence I just gave you would obviously suggest that the Republican Party is doing just fine here, even though the margins are razor tight. But Joe Biden just continues to put up numbers here that we certainly didn't see Hillary Clinton put up. Remember, on Election Day, Joe Biden led in the state of Florida by 1 point in the polling averages, according to Real Clear Politics. Okay, similarly to Iowa, a lot of people lost sight of that. all this noise about how quote unquote wrong the polls were, not really the case. Okay, Florida was a lot closer than people think, or rather, a lot further in the Donald Trump camp than people gave it credit for. But right now, I'm going to label it tilt Democrat because Joe Biden is putting up resounding numbers in this state. And even if you apply the same nationwide shift that we saw in favor of Donald Trump to this state right now, based off where the polls are, Joe Biden still wins. Okay, so keep an eye on that, and that's a huge win for him. And according to that, one of those paths that we mentioned earlier, where he has to basically flip Florida and one other swing state, well, he's now done that in Florida and Arizona. In the state of Georgia, obviously this is an infamous state for never having its act together with elections, for never exactly having their polling places to get all that stuff. Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp, they put together a race back in 2018 that was pretty controversial. Brian Kemp ultimately won the race. There are 2 Senate elections here. One is the regular election between David Perdue and Jon Ossoff. Right now, David Perdue leads right around within the margin of error, although some models have it just above it. And the other Senate special election, the Republicans are way ahead in that seat. And right now, it looks like the Representative Doug Collins is going to win that seat. It's even possible, because that's a jungle primary, that both Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler, who's holding that seat right now, could end up moving on to the runoff. So it's possible that no Democrat, whether it's Matt Lieberman, the son of Joe Lieberman, or Reverend Raphael Warnock, who spoke at John Lewis' funeral, it looks like right now both Republicans are going to move on to the runoff in January, and so far Jon Ossoff sort of has an outside shot, but at the end of the day, David Perdue is going to pull that out. And I expect, though, even though Joe Biden is leading, actually, in the state of Georgia, in the RCP polling average, right now I'm going to leave it tilt Republican, because I think that a number of different avenues, including, again, not a political statement here, but I've broken this down many times in this channel, including voter suppression. Okay, it's just a fact. It happens in this state, and that helps the Republican Party. Again, not saying whether or not what my views on that are. It's just a fact that is happening, and that helps the Republican Party considerably. In the state of South Carolina, on the presidential level, not going to be that close, even though Jim Clyburn, the representative from out here in the Charleston area, and of course the House Majority Whip now, he has had a huge hand in Joe Biden's campaign. He basically gave him the nomination. Remember, Joe Biden's campaign was in the toilet before he had that huge Super Tuesday win, in large part fueled by Jim Clyburn's endorsement, among other things. Clyburn, of course, voiced his agreement earlier today with Biden's selection of Kamala Harris for vice president. And then, of course, at the same time, we've got a pretty hot Senate race going on here between Lindsey Graham and Jamie Harrison. Jamie Harrison is kind of similar to Beto O'Rourke, kind of similar to Amy McGrath, one of these very, very high-profile upstart candidates who's running a great race against a very, very well-known incumbent, when in reality he's not going to win. Okay, even Beto O'Rourke, I think at the end of the day, most people knew he was not going to win that race. Jamie Harrison's definitely not going to win this race. I know that a number of polls in the last week to 10 days have shown that Jamie Harrison is narrowing that race up, including the most recent poll, I believe, from HIT Strategies, that actually had him tied at 44% all to Lindsey Graham. Don't waste any of your time on it. I know Lindsey Graham, or rather Jamie Harrison, raised $13.9 million. That is a staggering number in the month of June. He set a fundraising record for that. So, yes, I expect Jamie Harrison to get over 45%, because I think his name is James Smith, who was the Democratic candidate for governor here, got 46% of the vote against Henry McMaster. But again, the best efforts by the Democrats are just not enough in this state right now. And on the presidential level, I'm going to label it likely. State of Tennessee, safe Republican state. The days of Al Gore and Phil Bredesen are long gone for the Democratic Party. Marsha Blackburn runs that state now, along with Bill Hagerty, who won the Republican nomination for the other Senate seat there. That's being vacated by Bob Corker. So that's basically, I think it's Lamar Alexander rather now, who's leaving that seat open. Marsha Blackburn replaced Bob Corker. That's right. In the state of North Carolina, though, a lot of variables rest on this state in the election. There's obviously the presidential election happening here. There's a gubernatorial race and a Senate race, and two very hotly contested House districts that are up in the southern portion of the state. Right now, the Democrats are expected to flip those. And that would be very, very crucial to them potentially adding to their majority, which is rare. Okay, you don't often see that in the House of Representatives. It's much more common in the Senate, but you don't often see that in the House of Representatives, where one party that has the majority ends up actually adding to their majority. Right now, those two House districts in the southern portion of the state look like they're going to flip from red to blue. Roy Cooper is a very, very, very popular incumbent governor. He is easily going to defeat Dan Forest, the Republican challenger, possibly by over 15 points. That's going to be a big retention for the Democratic Party. And there's obviously a big Senate race happening here between Cal Cunningham, the veteran and the former state legislator there, and Thom Tillis, the first-time incumbent who won his re-election back in 2000, or won his first election back in 2014, defeating Kay Hagan. Now, oddly enough, the Democratic Party, for what is obviously, this state is also known for its big minority population. Strangely, though, the Democrats, the success that they've had here has come from old white guys. John Edwards, Roy Cooper, just to name a couple. And Cal Cunningham, while he's fairly young, is just another generic-looking white guy. And so it's kind of interesting how that dichotomy exists there. Right now, Cal Cunningham is really taking it to Thom Tillis, and it used to be a complete toss-up in Cook Political Report. It is now lean Democrat. Okay, and as a result, I'm going to label this tilt Democrat, because Cal Cunningham is outperforming Joe Biden in the polls here, and so I think that Cal Cunningham will end up winning his Senate race. Roy Cooper is going to win his gubernatorial race, and these two House districts down here are going to boost turnout as well. All of that's going to favor Joe Biden. That's another 15 electoral votes that are going to be in his column. In the state of Kentucky, people need to stop acting like Amy McGrath is going to beat Mitch McConnell. She is not. Okay, I know she's she was probably the best recruit the Democrats could have got to challenge Mitch McConnell for that seat. Chuck Schumer personally recruited her. She's not going to win. Okay, she's not going to beat Mitch McConnell. Some of the polls have her close. There was one poll from about 6 weeks ago that had her down by, I believe, 1 percentage point, or maybe even, I don't know, I think it was up by 1 percentage point. And that poll also mentioned that when the same voters that participated in the poll were made aware of the fact that McGrath supports term limits, her support amongst those participating voters rose significantly. So I expect Amy McGrath to hit 40%. She's not going to beat Mitch McConnell, and Donald Trump is not going to lose this state. West Virginia, ruby red state. In the state of Virginia, this for a long time was a strong Republican bastion. It's now a safe Democratic state. Mark Warner, the incumbent Democrat, is being challenged by Daniel Gade for this seat, and Daniel Gade is not going to beat him. Ralph Northam, of course, remains the governor. For the first time in a long time, the Democrats have full control of the state legislature here, so Joe Biden's going to be just fine in Virginia. He's also going to be just fine in Illinois, just as Dick Durbin, a very popular Democratic senator, and he is also part of the leadership of the Democratic Party in the Senate. He is also going to be just fine there. In the state of Indiana, remember, Barack Obama actually was able to carry the state of Indiana back in 2008, but since then, it's a total lost cause for the Democrats. I believe they still have one House seat here in the Indianapolis area, but other than that, total Republican state. Mike Pence puts it over the top as if it wasn't under any doubt. In the state of Ohio, of course, Barack Obama also won this state both times, in 2008 and 2012. Mike DeWine recently tested positive for coronavirus, but then randomly also tested negative the same day. So it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where that stands. He was able to defeat, I believe the candidate's name was Richard Cordray for the Democratic Party. DeWine won that race, and his approval rating is sky high right now, as he has been one of the more proactive governors in terms of his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Sherrod Brown, the Democrat who some saw as a pretty vulnerable incumbent, won his re-election bid in 2018. That was big for the Democratic Party's hopes of flipping back the Senate this time around. Since then, Joe Biden has done pretty well, actually, in some of the polling here. Some of the polling models have him with a net lead here. I believe RCP has Joe Biden trailing by about a point. So this is going to be much closer than it was in 2016. but I still expect it to go to Donald Trump by a tilt margin, putting in over 200 electoral votes. Okay, now in the state of Wisconsin, let's get into the Rust Belt. Obviously, this was, again, for all the talk about how quote-unquote wrong the polls were, this was kind of the only state in 2016 where you could actually say the polls were wrong. Hillary Clinton, according to RCP, led this state by over 6 percentage points. And so when Donald Trump won this state, it was just a complete shocker. Again, him winning in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, Ohio, those weren't that, they were a little mildly surprising because Hillary also led nationally, but not, Wisconsin was the only one that was just a total shocker. Since then, the Democratic Party has gone 4 for 4. Okay, very shortly into Trump's term, okay, I believe within the first year, a Democrat in the southern portion of the state, kind of down here, won a state Senate special election. And there is now, because of that, there is now a Democrat representing that district for the first time in over 30 years. After that, there were 2 statewide elections in the midterms. Scott Walker, who's a very, very high-profile Republican, lost, okay, to Tony Evers. That was a big flip for the Democratic Party. They were able to get that governorship back into their column. Tony Evers, who is now set to speak at the Democratic National Convention, which kicks off next week, he won against Scott Walker. Tammy Baldwin, who was briefly floated as a potential vice presidential nominee for Biden, won by 11 percentage points against her Republican challenger. Okay, so those were all good pieces of news for the Democrats. And then more recently, okay, only a few months ago now, there was a Supreme Court race in the state of Wisconsin. Remember, that was the site of all that controversy about the amount of polling places available. There were 180 polling sites in the city of Milwaukee alone, and it was reduced to 5. 5. Okay? Because of the pandemic and because of, the Republican-led state legislature, the whole thing, again, not my personal view necessarily, it's just a fact. And the Democrats still won that race. Now, the Republicans still own the majority in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, but that does go to show you there's a lot of enthusiasm among the Democratic Party in this state, and that combined with consistent polling advantages for Joe Biden makes me label this a likely Democratic state. That's the first time I've done that on this channel. Normally I have this tilt or lean, and this is the first time I'm labeling this likely. In the state of Michigan, there's not much to discuss here. Okay, there really isn't. Biden's got this one almost locked down entirely. Okay, similarly to Wisconsin, there were 2 statewide races in 2018. One of them was won by Gretchen Whitmer, who there are now 2 out of the last 3 governors of the state of Michigan are Democratic women, the other being Jennifer Granholm. And then Debbie Stabenow, also a woman, was able to defeat John James, who is now challenging Gary Peters for the other Senate seat. And any hope that John James had of getting a little convention bump at the RNC has been dashed now that that's been canceled, and we're still kind of waiting to find out what the RNC is really going to be like virtually. And so those things considered, along with the Trump campaign literally pulling their ads out of the state of Michigan, kind of tells you all you need to know. Okay, now obviously this is going to be a close state just because it naturally is that way, but it's going to be Joe Biden's unless something very dramatic happens. State of Maryland, pretty easy that's Massachusetts. There we go. Maryland is a safe Democratic state. Let me put that back in the toss-up column. There we go. Washington, D.C., the most liberal area of the United States. Delaware, of course, was the state Joe Biden represented for many, many years. Delaware, oddly enough, is not quite as blue a state as many people think. Republicans regularly get over 40% of the vote there, and usually, I don't know the name of the county, but usually win the county that is in the city of Dover. Now, in New Jersey, obviously, the Republicans for a little while thought they might have something going on there after Chris Christie was able to win. And let's not forget, sometimes, even on presidential levels, state of New Jersey, the Republicans can inch, kind of troublingly for the Democrats at least, near that 45% mark. But in this election, it's not going to be anything to worry about for the Democrats. State of Connecticut, same thing. Rhode Island, same thing. Massachusetts, even though that Senate election is very interesting there because of who is going to win that primary, just keep an eye on that because Ed Markey versus Joe Kennedy is worth watching, but Joe Biden's going to be just fine. Remember, Massachusetts is one of these northeastern states that has Republican governors. Maryland has a Republican governor. Massachusetts does. New Hampshire has a Republican governor. Vermont also has a Republican governor, if you can believe it. All right, in the state of Pennsylvania, just like these two other Rust Belt states, two statewide elections, Democrats won them both in 2018. Tom Wolf, the governor, won his reelection bid in 2018. Bob Casey, the incumbent senator, won his reelection bid in 2018. So those were big flips or retentions rather, for the Democratic Party. Remember, Scrappy Scranton Joe, as he used to be called, this was the state he was born in, consistent polling advantages. Kamala Harris, you can imagine, is probably going to turn out some, the vote or a little bit more in suburban Philadelphia amongst the African-American community, just as she's expected to do at least somewhat into suburban Detroit and suburban Milwaukee and suburban Raleigh. In Pennsylvania, all things considered, there's just no reason to believe that Donald Trump is in any kind of position to win this state right now. And so I have this as a lean Democrat. And so you can see this is the state of the race right now. I know within the last week or so, some of the models have shown that there could be a little bit of a narrowing happening in the national race. I personally don't really see it that way. State of New York, nothing to State of New York, nothing to discuss there. Safe Democratic state. Vermont, on the presidential level, nothing to discuss. Phil Scott, the Republican governor, along with Chris Sununu, Charlie Baker, and Larry Hogan, obviously are these four very moderate Republican governors that do a very good job in those states and as a result have huge approval ratings. But on the presidential level, it's always going to go Democrat. Same in New Hampshire, although not necessarily always Democrat. This was the closest state out of all 50 in 2016. And keep an eye on this state in 2022 because Maggie Hassan, who won her election bid in 2016 by 0.1%, okay, it really couldn't be any closer than that, she could potentially be challenged by Chris Sununu, who is currently the governor, who is leading in the polls right now. Remember, New Hampshire and Vermont, they each have two-year terms for their governors. Chris Sununu could challenge her, okay, in 2022, and that could potentially flip the Senate back to the Republicans or keep it in their favor, depending on what happens this time around. Meanwhile, Jeanne Shaheen, the incumbent Democratic senator, is being challenged by Republican Kelly Ayotte, and as of now, Jeanne Shaheen is thoroughly defeating her. And on the presidential level, this is going to be a Democratic state, even though it's, I'm not going to label it safe just because the margins sometimes are pretty tight here, but it's gonna be in Joe Biden's camp. And the last state here, just before my laptop dies here, Maine. Now, obviously, this is one of these deals with the split vote, the other being Nebraska. Notice how I didn't give that one extra vote to Joe Biden because the polling doesn't back that up necessarily. But in Maine, it's always confusing necessarily as to which is which, but right now, Joe Biden is going to take the 2 electoral votes and then the 2nd congressional district, whereas this one is the one that Donald Trump was able to win, giving him 1 out of the 4 electoral votes from this state. And as of now, I think it's going to go to Joe Biden by a tilt margin because that district was actually won by Jared Golden in the 2018 midterms in the House, and he's winning again as of now. And so that suggests a bit of a shift going on. So there's your map. And from 2018, that is 102 electoral votes flipped from red to blue. Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and 1 electoral vote in Maine, while also holding on to New Hampshire, Minnesota, and Nevada. So there is your map. Okay, obviously this is still a very fluid situation, but we're only 84 days away now, 13 weeks away from today, Tuesday. So obviously keep your eye out for any changing polls. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please comment down in the suggestions below. Please hit that subscribe button if you have not already. As always, if you have questions, you need to make a correction for me over something that I glossed over, or you want to know something about your particular state, hit that up in the comments section below, and I will be sure to address them in my next video. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.